This week, I will also end the government policy of trying to socially engineer race and gender into every aspect of public and private life. We will forge a society that is colorblind and merit-based.
Colorblind, merit-based? What would that do to the Democrat Party's project? That would ruin everything. Come on, what about DEI? Got to have more DEI. Well, good Tuesday to you and welcome back once again. President Trump very busy yesterday, 46 executive orders. A bunch more presidential actions, personal actions, presidential actions. Very busy yesterday. 3 speeches, 1 lengthy press conference. Inaugurated President of the United States, attended inaugural balls. Pardoned January 6th political prisoners. News media is very angry. Trump pardoning virtually all of the 1,250 plus January 6th people that were convicted of crimes. The 3-day siege of the White House, forcing the evacuation of the president and the first family, torching the church of the presidents. Nobody was sentenced to a day in prison because they were only attacking the Trump White House, threatening President Trump's life, the family of President Trump. No big deal. The news media was okay with that. You remember they were out there saying it was mostly peaceful while everything was burning behind them because Democrats and violence, they go together like carrots and peas, don't they? Carrots and peas. Remarkable stuff. And we're just talking about Joe Biden's blanket pardons yesterday for a whole range of people. And now there appears to be some question as to whether the U.S. Capitol Police Lieutenant Michael Byrd, who shot and killed Ashley Babbitt, a 12-year Air Force veteran, not expelled for repeated cocaine use. The police officer, police lieutenant, who was praised and applauded and given awards by Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats for shooting and killing without warning an unarmed woman who may have been guilty of the crime of trespassing, and then again, maybe not. But the Democrats applauded that, and there are reports, and I have the reports in front of me, saying that Michael Byrd, the police officer, shot Ashley Babbitt, killed Ashley Babbitt, was on the list of people pardoned by Joe Biden yesterday. Now it appears there's some question about that because apparently everybody that testified before the January 6th committee gets a blanket pardon for whatever murders they may have committed, whatever, child sex trafficking they may have been involved with. Blanket pardon forever and ever. Don't worry about that. But if Michael Byrd testified before the January 6th committee, then he would be pardoned. If he did not testify before the January 6th committee, then maybe not pardoned. Now, there were a number of people whose identities were not revealed after they testified, when they testified before the January 6th committee. According to the great and wonderful Julie Kelly, who really knows the subject better than anybody, or just about anybody for sure. And Julie Kelly said there were a number of witnesses who were not publicly named. It is my understanding, Julie Kelly said, that Michael Byrd did an interview with the January 6th committee. That being said, the pardon seems very narrow so that he can still be prosecuted for murder, Julie Kelly said, and I think that's just great. So let's look at that because, honestly, if Derek Chauvin was sent to prison for decades, then how is it that Michael Byrd, who shot and killed a 12-year Air Force vet, who didn't assault a police officer, didn't break a window, but was climbing through a window that someone else broke. Hey, she's climbing through a window. That's a death penalty offense. Shoot and kill her. So maybe he hasn't been pardoned. I think maybe the Justice Department should take a look at whether Michael Byrd was pardoned by Joe Biden, and if not, should look at what the legal possibilities, the legal options are there. truly remarkable things we have going on in our country, and yesterday changed everything for the better. Also remember, today is the anniversary in 1977 of Jimmy Carter, brand new president, pardoning all of the draft dodgers and draft evaders from the entire Vietnam War because, wah. And the left-wingers at the Mediaite Isaac Shore typing, "Two small men taint Inauguration Day with disgraceful pardons." Disgraceful pardons, right? And now they're very upset because pardons are bad. They were good when Joe Biden was just pardoning his son, who you may remember he promised he wouldn't pardon. You remember when Joe Biden and Corinne Jean-Pierre, they both promised repeatedly that Joe Biden would never pardon his son, Hunter Biden, right?
His son, Hunter, is also up for being sentenced next month. Does the president have any intention of pardoning him?
We've been asked that question multiple times. Our answer stands, which is no.
No, he's not going to pardon Hunter Biden. And Joe Biden said it repeatedly, too.
Will you accept the jury's outcome, their verdict, no matter what it is?
Yes.
And have you ruled out a pardon for your son?
Yes.
Yes, and then, of course, he went ahead and pardoned him. And then yesterday, he pardoned his entire family, basically. It was quite a remarkable thing to see because he added pardon after pardon. His brother, everybody's wives, his, people that clean their houses. They, all right, not people that clean their houses, but family members all over the place, up the yin-yang. Just amazing stuff. And then President Trump came in and started pardoning people from January 6th because he wanted to infuriate the Democrats, and sure enough, they've been infuriated. Now, the Associated Press headline, they're very upset. Trump grants sweeping pardon of January 6 defendants, including rioters who violently attacked police. Isn't that amazing? Now, the Democrat Party had rioters that violently attacked police on an ongoing basis for I don't know how many months and months. It seemed like more than a year. But from Seattle, Washington, and Portland, Oregon, to Washington, D.C., to the 3-day siege of the White House, the Democrats, they attacked and injured police all over the place. Again, at the White House, while President Trump was living in the White House, 160 to 180 police were injured in several days of riots, and nobody was sentenced to a single weekend in jail, not a night in jail. And that was all fine with the news media. They were there telling us it was mostly peaceful and all of that good stuff. But the police that were injured in the White House riots were not taken as, a serious matter. The Tampa Bay, Fox 13, June 1st, 2020, at least 60 Secret Service members injured during protests. They don't call them riots when they're Democrats. They call them protests. They insist that they're mostly peaceful, but they never are. So this was the day after, and the numbers continued to increase. This was when the president and the first family were evacuated to a bunker by the Secret Service, and the news media mocked and ridiculed President Trump. So did late-night TV and Saturday Night Live, because the Secret Service decided to evacuate the president and the first family to an underground bunker because of the Democrat mob, the violent criminal mob outside, rioting and in an insurrection that is a revolt against established authority, and that's what they were engaged in. More than 60 Secret Service officers and special agents sustained multiple injuries in 3 days' worth of violent clashes stemming from protests demanding justice for George Floyd in Washington, D.C. George Floyd had never been to Washington, D.C. The uprisings, insurrections, you might say. Again, this is a story from June 1st of 2020. And nobody was sentenced to a night in jail, not a weekend, not a month, not 22 years. Nobody was sentenced to jail. The uprisings overflowed from Lafayette Park, and continued near the White House on Saturday night and early into Sunday morning. Protesters, that is rioters, in the area had taken to the streets since Friday to condemn police brutality. So they engaged in brutality against police. Protesters threw bricks, rocks, bottles, fireworks. The fireworks were M80s. They also had Roman candles and bottle rockets, but an M80 will blow your hand off. It's an eighth of a stick of dynamite. They were throwing them at the police. Nobody was sentenced to a night in jail. So the protesters threw bricks, rocks, bottles, fireworks, and other items at police officers, and some Secret Service personnel were also directly physically assaulted as they were kicked, punched, and exposed to bodily fluids. That's right, they bring bottles of their own urine and feces, bags of their own feces, and hurl them at the police, too. At least 11 employees, that is Secret Service, were treated at local hospitals for non-life-threatening injuries. So, amazing stuff. And all of that was fine. Now, this was just the day after. The numbers continued to mount once we added in the U.S. Park Police, their federal law enforcement, and the D.C. Metropolitan Police, and the number got to between 160 and 180 police that were injured, and nobody was sentenced to a night in prison and night in jail. None of it. And on and on, right? And then, January 6th, well, that was the first riot that we ever saw, I guess. But it wasn't. It was all a big lie. It was the double standard, the two-tiered system of justice. Amazing stuff. And CNN's headline today, they assaulted cops and tried to overturn an election. What we know about Trump's mass pardons for January 6th rioters. Well, I can tell you that the preemptive pardons for all of the rioters at the White House who were pretending to care about black lives and then sending checks to Planned Parenthood. Isn't that amazing? They didn't care about black lives. They cared about attacking the police. They were part of organized, orchestrated attacks on the White House and the police, nationwide organization. And then June 11th of 2020, 10 days later, 150 local federal officers injured in D.C. protests. Again, they don't call them riots. They call them protests. Now we're up to 150 police injured. Attorney General William Barr said on June 7th that 750 officers were injured during the first week of demonstrations. Those are riots. A fifth of those officers were in D.C. That is nationwide stuff, and WUSA, the CBS station in Chicago, reporting back then about all the police being injured. And nobody sentenced to prison. Isn't that funny? Huh? Kind of interesting. And the news media is still very excited, and Joe Biden's corrupt Department of Injustice. January 4th of 2023, years later, 24 months since January 6th, the attack on Capitol, and they said approximately 140 officers were injured. We got 160 at the White House, and nobody sentenced to a night in prison. Isn't that amazing? No jail sentences, no prison sentences for all of the rioters forcing the evacuation of the president at the White House and the first family. Just amazing. But the Justice Department, for years, rounding up people, like Casablanca, rounding up the usual suspects, spending millions and millions of dollars hunting down January 6 protesters, but attacked the White House for 3 days, not for 2 hours, but for 3 days, injuring 160 to 180 law enforcement, forcing the evacuation of the president, setting fire to the Church of the Presidents. Not a single jail sentence handed down, and not a single angry media headline about it either. Huh.
I want to be clear in how I characterize this. This is mostly a protest. It is not, generally speaking, unruly, but fires have been started.
Chris here with a list of things that none of us should trust. The Washington Post, the New York Times, anything on CNN. Here's a list of things that I do trust. The Washington Times. Support real journalism for just $1 a week at washingtontimes.com/Chris. It's a big day in America, big day, and now the Democrats, and that means the media, they were all fine with Joe Biden's pardoning his brother and his in-laws and everybody in the corrupt Biden family with their $27 million in ill-gotten gains. President Trump then says, wait a minute, we're looking at a two-tiered system of justice here between Democrat riots and January 6th. So forget about it. 22 years for Enrique Tarrio of the Proud Boys, African-American, Cuban-American, pro-American, stood up the Proud Boys in neighborhoods where the police weren't protecting people in the George Floyd riots, and never mind all that. So President Trump, big actions. And I have Brent Bozell, the great Brent Bozell from the Media Research Center, coming up on my show in about 10 minutes. Right now, let's go to the telephones, Michael. Let's go to Kay, calling from Germantown, Maryland. Okay, you're on the Chris Plant Show.
Hi, Chris. I'm calling from Germantown area, and just to let you know, you were talking about the June 2020 riots, protesters. Sorry. And I just want to say my cousin is enlisted in the D.C. Air National Guard, and she was called up. There were 2 hours of riot training, and then the D.C. police have been told by Mayor Bowser they were not to interact with any of the protesters, and so. After 2 hours of training, they were, lined up against the gate of the White House and everything. And there were protesters marching away with super soakers with a bleach solution. And several of the guardsmen and women had permanent damage to their eyes from these protesters with their super soakers and bleach solution. Because you were just listing all the different, the bricks and the bottles of, human fluids. And but that's just one that had, that one that I didn't hear. So I just want to let you know. And, just outrageous.
Well, it is, they give them 2 hours of training and then say, but don't become involved in the, and also, do you remember, since you mentioned the Guard, the Democrats called up the military. Oh, Trump might call up the military. He's Hitler. And then the moment they took over, they called up the National Guard and occupied the streets of Washington forever and ever, with Humvees everywhere in my neighborhood and every place else. And you may remember that Guard members were being put up in a parking garage in the winter time in Washington, and they ordered pizzas delivered to the garage, and the Democrats delivered the pizzas to the National Guardsmen with shards of broken glass in them. Do you remember this?
I remember hearing that. No, but I do remember my cousin saying that the Guardsmen who were flown in from all over the country brought COVID with them, and so the guards, they were busy taking care of the guards had been flown over from every one of the 50 states, I think, to help in this riot, quelling the riot, and they brought COVID with them. So it was a complete just debacle.
I blame the Chinese communists for that. Yeah, and Democrats put broken glass in pizzas delivered to guardsmen. And we have returned on a very grand Tuesday to all of you and to all of America and to the world, to all of humanity. The United States is back in the saddle, and the commie pinko expletives deleted have been booted to the curb appropriately. It was fun watching Air Force One fly away yesterday after flying a lap on the Mall in Washington and then flying away. And there he goes, Joe Biden gone and soon to be forgotten, one might hope. And in the meantime, in between time, we got fun, but on the line, I have, I hope, I'm told, and I believe it's true, the great Brent Bozell of the Media Research Center and Newsbusters and so much more, so much great work. And Brent Bozell, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a hell of a day.
It is a hell of a day, and I know that in your household, it is definitely a hell of a day. And Brent, for those who don't know, Brent's son, L. Brent Bozell IV, was caught up in the January 6th nuttiness and was grabbed by the Biden Justice Department. And knowing it's Brent Bozell's son, conservative activist, media kingpin, they grabbed Brent's son and they tried him in the kangaroo court that they stood up like a third world country, threw him in prison, and then something remarkable happened. Well, in the last 24 hours, and Brent, tell me all about it.
Okay, to set the table correctly, he's one of the 1,500 or so J6ers. He was guilty of breaking two windows. One was a felony because of the cost, and one was a misdemeanor because of the cost to replace. Among other things, they tried to slap him with two felonies until the judge pointed out that they weren't telling the truth. At the 11th hour, because he wouldn't take a multi-year prison term for this, they were going to throw the book at him with everything. They tried the insurrection. That got thrown out. At the 11th hour, they tagged an assault charge on him. And just to walk down memory lane, I was doing your show, and I urge people to go on the government website and look at the footage that they used against my son. You wouldn't find a single person in the United States of America who would call that an assault. And you pointed out that you had tried to look at it and they had taken it down, which tells you everything you need to know. At the last second at the sentencing, they then tried to attack him with a terrorist enhancement charge. Putting him on the same level as Osama bin Laden. This is a man who's never had more than a traffic ticket in his entire life. Well, he is like so many others. And that's why President Trump said that's not going to stand. And that's enough of this, and I'm letting him out. And he let him out, and my son left last night with his wife and three little girls. They spent the night in a hotel, and they're on their way home.
And they're on their way home at long last. And for how long was he incarcerated?
Almost a half a year with a 45-month prison term.
45.
He was
I just told you. Sentenced to 45 months in prison. And, you know, look, I got to say, and I know, and you and I talked about it at the time, and it's not like you approve of the behavior, and the behavior was out of line. And the problem that I have is the whole idea of equal justice under law. And in the last hour, I was just talking about the days of riots at the White House, forcing the evacuation of the President of the United States and the first family, 160 at least police officers, mostly federal, injured in the riots, orchestrated riots, people bringing in M80s that we call firecrackers, but it's an eighth of a stick of dynamite, and Roman candles and bottle rockets and frozen bottles of frozen water by the pallet, hurling them at the police, rocks, bricks, tearing up sidewalks, vandalizing buildings, setting fire to the Church of the Presidents, and not one single rioter from 3 days of riots at the White House was sentenced to a single day in jail. There were windows broken all over that neighborhood, and not a single rioter was sentenced to a single day in jail or prison for any of that. And I marvel at that. And all the riots, and again, my neighborhood was looted where I live. Neighborhood around this radio station was looted repeatedly. And again, they're not rounding people up in Alaska 8 months later for any of this. So for me, Brent, it's about the two systems of justice and the two standards that have been applied, obviously for political reasons. And the left, the Democrat Party, is the left now for sure and for real, are rounding up their political enemies and having like a Cuban-style, Soviet-style imprisonment effort. And while their rioters are doing, and again, were it not for all these riots, I've said it before, were it not for all these riots, the Democrats normalizing mob street political violence, January 6th never would have happened. But it had become so normal in the United States that a small number of people got carried away. And what was a mostly peaceful it was otherwise a mostly peaceful gathering, and it genuinely was. They didn't set fire to the Capitol. The Democrats set fire to the Church of the Presidents, and on it goes. But Brent, so now your son is headed home with his wife and his bride and his children today, and boy, you're going to be smiling a smile the likes of which you've probably never seen.
I really am. But at the same time, I have a cold fury inside of me because of the way all of them were treated. What were they accused of? They were accused of disrupting Congress. What does Code Pink do about once a month when there are Senate or House hearings dealing with issues they don't like? They disrupt them. What is done to them? Absolutely nothing. What about the Palestinian protesters who stormed into the country, into the Congress, also disrupted Congress? What was done to them? Absolutely nothing. The BLM rioters, $2.1 billion, the most destruction in the history of this country, stores looted and burned down, police stations burned to the ground, 4 cops killed, 20, I think it is in all, killed, hundreds injured. In Minneapolis, those rioters sued and got restitution in millions of dollars. In New York, they were negotiating for the exact same thing. How many have been brought to justice of the thousands and thousands? Here's another one, Chris. We'll never know the answer. One of the reasons that you had all of those pardons is so people won't have to deliver the answers that are required. How much money did the federal government spend on these J6 investigations? I can tell you only with my son and all the effort that was spent on getting him, looking at every second of footage, which, by the way, they didn't share with him, but they had every second of footage. Looking at all that, I can only say that they spent in the 7 figures. I don't know where it was, but it was in the 7 figures. Now multiply that by 1,500.
Well, right. That's exactly right. And again, it's and I know you're a law and order guy. You're a conservative. You're an American, and you don't want to see things like this. But again, there were 550 riots across the United States. Every single one of them perpetrated by Democrats. And you mentioned the police stations being attacked. The courthouses attacked, federal courthouse in Portland, the Mark O. Hatfield federal courthouse attacked for, dozens of days consecutively in a row. They had this chop zone where 3 people were murdered. All of them were African-American men, by the way, including a 19-year-old who just graduated from high school the day before and was murdered. And the news media treated all of that like it was no big deal. The Justice Department treated all of that more importantly, like it was no big deal. And the corrupt FBI. Now, Brent, we're looking at President Trump yesterday. Yeah, go ahead.
Let's just one thing, and let's never forget Kamala Harris setting up a legal defense fund to help those rioters who did all that.
Absolutely true. Getting on Twitter and encouraging people to contribute money to a fund that would aid and assist the rioters. And you said it. You said 20 killed in the nation in the riots nationwide. I think it may have been 24. You said 4 police officers killed. Remember, retired police captain David Dorn being shot, and his killers made video of him sucking his last breath and dying on the sidewalk after they shot him, and they posted the video on the internet. And this is no big deal. George Floyd is a big deal, but career police officer, African-American, I always forget, African-American man, David Dorn, shot and murdered by looters. He was trying to help out his neighbor who was having his business looted, and that his neighbor was an immigrant man who started a business in St. Louis. And David Dorn is shot and killed, retired police captain, African-American man. And that's a non-story in our corrupt, filthy media and the Democrat Party. But I repeat myself, and I'm absolutely amazed at the madness that the left has inflicted upon what used to be law and order, our system of justice in the United States of America. And I can't tell you how happy I am now I've met your son and your family and Norma and your wonderful wife and your family. Just so great. In fact, we saw each other the other night at the Navy Memorial event last week. And now let me ask you this, because I'm told my intelligence network has it that you were spotted at an inaugural ball last night.
And they said, "What the hell is he doing?" Yeah, I was just hoping. I was hoping for once. I was hoping for left-wing anti-Trump protesters, because they would have all been icicles out there, and it would have been so much fun laughing at them. I didn't see a single one of them. The weather isn't right for their cause. But yeah, it was great. Look, here's the wonderful thing. When Kamala Harris ran for president, she ran on the most cynical, dishonest platform imaginable. Suddenly, after being openly in favor of no wall, no border whatsoever, she's on the record saying that. Suddenly, at the 11th hour, they have this little bill to do a little wall, and then they say, "Well, we've been in favor of it all along, and the Republicans never went to." Utterly cynical that she supported a tax cut the moment Donald Trump said he supported a tax cut. On and on. She wanted to drill for oil. On and on it went. The cynical attempt to manipulate the American voter. It didn't work. At the same time, listen to the president's speech yesterday. Unequivocal. Every single thing he's going to do. Unequivocal. He'll be held to account for everything he said he was going to do yesterday. But what you have to, and what is driving the left crazy, is that he's being so honest, and America's loving it. For once. Well, we've become so accustomed to being lied to by our government, the federal government in particular, but not exclusively. We have governments in California and Maryland and places too. But we become so accustomed to being lied to by the government, and then the news media taking it from there as agents of the Democrat Party, carrying the lie and misrepresenting January 6th, which, again, I'm convinced NBC News would have called mostly peaceful if they had been Democrats, and would be outraged that anyone there were just exercising their First Amendment rights. And again, you get some bad. You shouldn't assault police officers. Now, your son did not assault any police officers, as we've already established. And you break a window. Okay, broken windows policing, but that is, in any other circumstance over the last several years with Democrats rioting everywhere, that would have been at most a slap on the wrist. But these guys are really, abusing the Justice Department and the FBI to come after the political enemies of the Democrat Party. And the political enemies of the Democrat Party are held to an entirely different standard. They were, Chris, that day, I wasn't there. My wife Norma was there, and 3 of my children were there. And they will tell you that there were some 100,000 people who were there at the rally for the president. Well, if that's the case, then that means that 99.999% of the people who were there had nothing to do with the narrative that was painted thereafter. Have you ever heard a reporter say that?
Right. Yet I think 100,000 may actually be a bit of a lowball estimate for the crowds, not to get into the crowd size on the mall thing, but I think it may have been larger than, and you're right. And then if there are 1,000 people approximately that have been charged with crimes, 1 out of 1,000, not 1 out of 100 is 1%, right? 1 out of 1,000 is 1/10 of 1%. And you're absolutely right. Brent Bozell.
Chris.
Yes.
Chris, we're very quick. One of the great inflection points. In 2017, there wasn't a single person in January of 2017 on the left who wanted to be seen in the same area code as Donald Trump. Last night, everyone from Silicon Valley was there.
Yeah. What does that tell you?
That tells you the world has changed.
Yeah, and that the left has gone so far, the Democrat Party has gone so far left, they've become so radical that even California.
Chris, very quickly.
Yeah.
Chris, very quickly, I want to thank you. I want to thank Mark Levin, Larry O'Connor, all of you who kept this issue alive. Thank God for the president, but thank God for you too.
Well, and thank God for you. You're a great American hero. You've been telling the truth and fighting for the truth and media long before most of the country had been alerted to the issues that we had. And Media Research Center and Newsbusters, the greatest. And you're the greatest. And you have the greatest galas in the city of Washington, too, the great black tie galas, the most wonderful dinners ever. Brent Bozell, I'm saluting you, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, buddy. God bless you and your family. And welcome home. What a country this is. Didn't know we'd have to fight for it this way, but the left is here. We have to fight for it this way now. Now, Kamala Harris, as we were discussing earlier with great law enforcement caller Matt, Kamala Harris raised money for the criminals rioting, burning, all of that madness. She wanted more of it. She wanted it funded. Well, Joe Biden yesterday, when a vice president leaves the vice presidency, normally that ex-vice president gets 6 months of Secret Service protection after leaving. The president for the rest of their life. The vice president gets 6 months of Secret Service protection after leaving the vice presidency. Joe Biden extended Kamala Harris's to June of 2026. So an extra year of Secret Service protection, which means you get, a free armored limousine and an armed Secret Service driver and protection. And so you get the free chauffeur-driven armed limo thing, and just amazing stuff. Man, oh man. So Joe Biden extended it because he's a profoundly corrupt person, profoundly. And his family is corrupt, and that's why he pardoned them all. And he's pardoning the January 6th committee members and the witnesses to the January 6th committee. And maybe not Lieutenant Byrd, who shot and killed Ashley Babbitt, a full pardon for him. We also today have the National Prayer Service at the Washington National Cathedral, about 2 miles from this radio station, with everybody pouring in there, the former presidents and so on, and President Trump as well. Big stuff going on around town today, the day after Inauguration Day. President Trump very busy yesterday. Got more of that coming up for you as well.